When I was reading the gospel that Drew has read to us, we're given a little bit of it in that section, but the whole context of the whole chapter is something else. So I hope that this will really speak to you as it's been speaking to me this week. For as long as I can remember, there's been some kind of a fascination, if you like, both in the church world, but also just in the regular world, with the subject of the end times or the last days. I mean, Hollywood's really done well with that. And many books, people have made a lot of money on this. And religious movements have started just on that alone. A lot of speculation. Sometimes the movies and the books even kind of profess a certainty about how it's all going to work out. It's big money. It's been a tad divisive at times in the church, you know this. But as I was reflecting upon it, I was reminded in the scripture today, it's not meant to divide us at all. In fact, the subject of the end times or the last days, they're meant to unite us as people around Jesus. They're meant to strengthen us in our faith and to encourage us all the more as followers of Jesus. The subject of the last days and end times should unite us in our love for God and should unite us in truly finding ways to really be there for other people, to really care for people, to make every day count, not to waste any time, but to have a heart individually and as a community to really help people appreciate, here it is, the why, the who, the when, and the where of what's going on. So with that little bit of intro, we open up the book of Mark to the 13th chapter. As Jesus was leaving the temple that day, one of his disciples said, "Teacher, look at these magnificent buildings. Look at the impressive stones in the walls." I mean, the temple that Herod built was regarded as one of the wonders of the world at that time. It was really something. I mean, the building of the temple began around 20 BC, and by the time these disciples of Jesus were expressing awe and wonder, 50 years had already passed, and the temple was still under construction. Quite a feat. Kind of reminds you of Eglinton. Took a long time. The historian Josephus tells us that some of these stones, these impressive stones, kind of get your mind around this, were 40 feet long, were 12 feet high, 18 feet wide. Archways were 41.5 feet, and the stones used to build them were 24 feet long. And aside from all these amazing dimensions, and they are interesting, the historian Josephus tells us, he describes the temple facade as being covered with massive plates of gold. Very attractive building. There's so much more that could be said about this building, but it's no wonder the disciples of Jesus were just blown away by this building. It seemed to be the ultimate in human achievement and something that would clearly last the test of time. And we see Jesus initially echoing their amazement. In verse 2, Jesus replies, "Yes, look at all these great buildings." So yes, they're really impressive. But then he follows by saying, a day will come when not one of those massive stones, and they were massive stones, will stand upon another. Jesus says they will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left upon another. So 4 of the 12 disciples at this time, they can't rest. Jesus' prophecy about the temple did a real number on them. And they were troubled and puzzled by his words. I mean, how could such an amazing building ever be toppled, Jesus? And why would it be toppled? And so we see the four of them leaving the others behind and going to Jesus in the hope that he might connect the dots. Here's what it says. Later, Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives across the valley from the temple. Peter, James, John, and Andrew came to him privately, and they asked him, "Tell us, when will all this happen? And secondly, what sign will show us that these things are about to be fulfilled?" Peter, James, John, Andrew. These men are real examples for you and for me. There may be times in your life when something is keeping you up at night, and it wasn't the cup of coffee. The big questions, concerns, and worries, fears. And you can't rest. Something's troubling you, baffling you, concerns about the future. The point is, it is good to bring all of that, all those questions, fears, and concerns to Jesus, just like these four men did. And they actually brought two questions. The first question, Jesus, tell us when all this will happen. Second, what sign will show us these things are about to be fulfilled? So this is how Jesus begins. He says, don't let anyone mislead you. Now, what does this suggest to us? It tells us that there would be people out there who would intentionally, deliberately try to mislead and to confuse and to deceive. And if you think that's rotten, you're right. It's rotten that anyone would try to mislead and deceive. Anyone. And Jesus knew it. And he emphasized the need to have a good grip upon his words, and for his words to have a good grip upon his followers. And then he goes on and he addresses the when and the what questions in a 31-verse response, of which we only heard a little bit this morning. There is so much, but I'm just going to focus in as quick as possible. Set your clocks now. On 4 sections in how Jesus responds to those 2 questions. Section 1. Jesus says there will be an attack on the city. What city? The city was Jerusalem. And he warned that in their near future, a fierce attack would take place. And the only sure way to survive that attack would literally be to run for the hills. That's exactly what he tells them to do. And historians, again, to read up on it, historians sadly tell us that the majority of people did not run for the hills when Rome came attacking in 70 AD, just less than 40 years after Jesus had said this prophecy. Under Titus, who would become the emperor of Rome, the temple would be destroyed, just as Jesus said it would happen. And those who stayed within the city walls, they were either taken as slaves, or they were taken by the sword, or they were taken by starvation. Historians tell us that 97,000 people were taken captive, and 1.1 million people suffered death. And historians spell out a dismal and horrific details in all of that, which I will no need to go through. But again, as Jesus said, only those who fled were saved. So what would be a sign leading up to the destruction of the temple? The first, an attack upon the city. And the key word there is the word flee. Take this seriously. Then he goes into section 2. he says there would be an attack upon believers. As it was concerning the prophecy of Jesus about the temple being destroyed, so his prophecy would prove true about faithful believers being persecuted. This is what he says. When these things begin to happen, watch out. You will be handed over to local councils. You'll be beaten in the synagogues. You will stand trial before governors and kings because you are my followers. This will be an opportunity for you to speak about me. Persecution in the synagogues, persecution by the state. And again, history spells it out clearly. Jesus was right. Early Christians, you know this, were literally hated by the Roman Empire and by the Jewish leadership at that time. And the reason? Rome insisted, Caesar's Lord. And Christians knew better. No, he's not. No, he's not. Jesus is Lord. And the Jews at that time could not handle the thought of Jesus being Lord. That was blasphemy. Worthy of death. And families would turn against one another, son, daughter, mom and dad, if they came to a place of believing in Jesus. And just as the temple would be a target for attack, those who were serious about Jesus would be hunted down, beginning, as you know, with the martyrdom of Stephen. And the key word there was the word endure. Endure to the end, which takes us to the third section of what Jesus says, which really was into our reading today. He says, if anyone tells you, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will rise up and perform signs and wonders so to deceive, if possible, even God's chosen one. He's saying the temple would be under attack, believers would be under attack, the truth would be under attack. He warned that many lies would arise in an effort to deceive people, to cause them to compromise their faith, to dilute their faith, to lead them astray from their faith. Why? Because to embrace the truth about Jesus would be challenging, would be uncomfortable, would be demanding, to say the least. And it was far easier to reconstruct a truth that people could live with, one that suited their lifestyles, and one that didn't cause the state to be concerned. St. Paul would warn with these words, the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but will have itching ears that they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. So Jesus speaks of how light and darkness collide. How people, these are Jesus' words, prefer darkness over light because their deeds are evil. A watered-down gospel is very attractive. People prefer a gospel that makes no demands. But as you and I know, that's not the gospel. That's not the gospel. And heresies would arise because people wanted all of their questions about God answered in a convenient little box. God in a box, if you like. The attraction of the cults over the years. We've got it all figured out. You don't have to do any thinking on your own anymore. We've done all the thinking for you. The mystery has been solved. Trust us. Don't ask any questions. Buy what we're selling. Drink the Kool-Aid. And boy, obey our self-appointed leaders. It's sad. It's a scary history. Deception, again, is big money. And Jesus and the apostles strongly encourage us as believers to be people of the Word and to study, to be diligent in study. And when you've got a question, don't leave it hanging, but do all you can to search out the answer. No, but no matter how much we learn or discover about God, we are finite. He is infinite. There is much we will never fully understand. Some questions will remain unanswered. And the more I'm sure this is your experience too, the more we learn, the more we realize just how much more there is to learn. Do you agree? Living with a bit of mystery should only cause us to trust him all the more. I am fine with a bit of mystery. I haven't got electricity all figured out yet, but I sure appreciate electricity. I haven't got my wife of 46 years all figured out yet, but I sure appreciate my wife. A bit of mystery is okay. Section 4. Jesus goes beyond addressing the signs that will lead to the destruction of the temple, and he begins to share the signs that will signal his return. Listen to what he says. You will hear of wars and threats of wars, but don't panic. These things must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. Nation will go to war against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be earthquakes in many parts of the world, as well as famines. But this was only the first of birth pains. There'll be more to come. At that time, after the anguish of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will give no light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken, and then everyone will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with great power and glory. So, what are we to anticipate, to expect? Jesus says, well, expect wars, expect famines, expect earthquakes. And then this amazing way of speaking, darkness of the sun and of the moon. The 4 disciples who were with him, they would get that. They would understand that. They were familiar with that kind of imagery from Amos, from Joel, from Isaiah. That would all spring to mind when Jesus began speaking in that way, painting those pictures. And we know from a very quick, short study of history that wars became commonplace as soon as Rome was dismantled. We also know of earthquakes that took their toll then, destroying cities like Laodicea and causing an eruption of Vesuvius that would literally bury Pompeii in lava at 79 AD. And there would be great famines between 41 and 54 AD. I mean, the point is, what Jesus said would happen, happened. And it continues to happen. Life is fragile. And life is hard, if not impossible, to keep up with all the disasters and all the famines and all the diseases and all the wars. I mean, the numbers boggle us and just break our hearts when we learn, for instance, that in the 20th century, that was the most murderous century in recorded history, with an estimated 187 million people being killed in war in one century. According to the Daily Mail, at any given time, there are 40 conflicts happening in our world. So Jesus says, keep watch. Keep watch for what? Well, 2 things. Here's what they are. First of all, he wants his followers to keep watch. He says to them, number 1, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen. Not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows. So no one knows the day or the hour. So first of all, he says to us, don't try to set a date for his return. People have done that. People are doing that. Don't go there, he's saying. It's not about impressive charts, impressive timetables. The key word, though, is the word watch. Watch. But secondly, he says, and since you don't know when the time will come, here it is, be on guard and stay alert. And since you don't know when the time will come, be on guard and stay alert. What does that mean to you and to me? I think it means to live as if this might be the final day. Wouldn't that be something? We're not allowed to have the signs cause us to fear. But as the world becomes increasingly complex and dark, those dark times should cause us to want to live as light all the more. Amen? And the greatest gift the world needs right now is from us. The call is to live every day as if this could be the last, be it by our death or be it by his return. Jesus simply wants us to be ready. So when I read this week, I said to myself, boy, oh boy, I'm glad those 4 disciples, Peter, James, Andrew, and John, I'm glad they couldn't sleep that night. I'm glad they came and asked Jesus those 2 questions. Because his response to their questions causes us to consider a question. Here's the question. Am I, you ask yourself, am I living in such a way that if this did prove to be our last day on earth, that our eternity would be secure in him? Are you ready for that day? I had 4 close friends die this week. And 2 of them I worked alongside in ministry for a long time. And as sad as that is for me, I rejoice because all of those 4 friends were ready for that day. And I was watching one of the funerals online yesterday from New Brunswick, and I was weeping with joy because I knew my friend Mac was ready for that day. So that's the first question. Are you ready for that day? It's coming. But secondly, somebody might say, I don't know. How can I be ready for that day? And it's marvelous that the Lord does not leave us guessing on that at all. I'm just going to share simply with you. Jesus says, as many as receive him, to those who believe on his name, he gives the right to become the children of God. We read, whoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Isn't that good news? And all those who come to me, Jesus says, I love this, will never be cast out. My part is to come, and his part is to hold us and never let us go. Security in such an insecure time. When I think of that, I ask myself and I ask you, why would I wait a moment longer? Why would I choose uncertainty and insecurity when Jesus is standing and saying, I just want you to know that I love you. I've given my life for you. I want to live my life with you and never let you go, no matter how confusing life becomes. And once you've had your final breath here, you're only getting started. Isn't that amazing? In a world of such uncertainty, we can be sure of one thing. Christ is for us. Let's make sure that we are for him. Sound good to you? Sounds good to me. Amen.